Hi everyone, Armine Bazikyan here from Bazikyan Law Group. This month we wanted to answer a very important question. Will my property taxes change after I create a trust? So this is oftentimes a question that we get in our office for our clients who are doing estate planning for the first time. And we thought it was important to kind of go over it and let you guys know what to expect when you're preparing a trust. So as with all things, the answer is it depends. It depends on the type of trust that you're creating. But essentially, if you're creating a revocable trust, your property taxes should not change whatsoever. If they do, just know that there was a very important error or several errors that were made during the estate planning process by your attorney. So let's jump in and kind of analyze this with using examples so that we could see what the outcomes may be. So let's, for example, use John and Jill. Let's say they bought their house in the 30s and they purchased it for $100,000. And over the years, there's been slight increases in their property taxes. And currently, their assessed value on that property is about $180,000. What that basically means is that they are paying property taxes on $180,000 value for that real piece of property that they own, for that real estate. Okay, because they're locked in to that purchase price, which was $100,000. Now they want to create a trust, but they're scared because they think that if they transfer their property into the trust, it's going to become a transfer of ownership and therefore change their property taxes. So let's dive into the property change or ownership change laws to figure out what actually happens. So taking a step back, anytime that we have a change of ownership in property, okay, where one owner is transferring to another owner or another entity, anyone else basically, anytime a transfer happens, what it does is it triggers a reassessment with the assessor's office. And what that basically means is that the reassessment happens almost immediately on that transfer date. The assessor wakes up and says, oh, new owner, got to analyze it and figure out what the property is worth as of today's value, as of fair market value. So let's say John's property is worth $1 million today, but he purchased it for $100,000. If John transfers his property to someone else, the new property taxes will be based on the fair market value on the day that he transferred it, okay? So anytime at all, anytime a transfer happens from one to another, the assessor wakes up and says, gotta analyze this, I gotta look at all the paperwork, let me see what you're doing here, what's going on. So it's very important because during that process, the assessor looks at all the paperwork. The assessor looks at your deed and all the exemption paperwork that's filed and says, okay, I think this transfer is legit and it falls under one of the exemptions that we have, so I'm not gonna reassess you, I'm not gonna increase the property taxes. Or the assessor might look at it and say, hey, this is not kosher, it doesn't fall under any of the exceptions, or your paperwork is not submitted correctly, I'm going to reassess you, I'm going to increase the property taxes to the fair market value. So what is important here, the takeaway, when you are creating an estate plan, you have to make sure that all of these documentations are filed properly, they're done correctly, and they're filed timely. If they're not done correctly or they're not filed in time, the assessor, during his analysis, will not have them. And if the assessor doesn't have them, the assessor is always going to fall back as a default on reassessing your property taxes. So let's say John and Jill did a trust, they transfer their property from their names into their trust. That transaction is exempt, meaning it should not create any reassessment on the property taxes. But if John didn't know that because he did it himself, right? He did a DIY trust, he did all this paperwork himself, and he never filed the exemption paperwork with the assessor's office, the assessor is going to reassess his property taxes. And one day he's going to wake up about 6 months later and receive a bill that's going to be way larger. It's going to be based on $1 million fair market value versus the $100,000 he paid in the 70s. So he's going to wake up and be shocked at his tax bill. And that's how he's going to discover that the assessor has reassessed, okay? Or let's say John goes into an attorney's office and they don't file the paperwork correctly, or they file it too late, right? In both of those scenarios, a reassessment could happen. So be very, very cautious. A revocable trust transfer of real property should not create any reassessment by the property tax assessor. So if it did, that means somewhere along the way there was a hiccup, something went wrong, okay? Now we're only talking about revocable trust transfers. With that said, there are other types of transfers to different types of trusts that do create a reassessment, so be very, very careful. In this video, we're only discussing revocable trusts, not LLCs, not anything else. But essentially, if done correctly, it should not cause any reassessment in property taxes at all. Feel free to contact our office. As you probably know by now, we provide free consultations. We'd be happy to chat with you and discuss what could be done. And if you need any assistance, feel free to contact our office. Have a good one.